All right, good afternoon, everyone. Here in Las Vegas, thank you for coming. Everyone present in the Carson City hearing room, thank you. And also welcome to everyone joining us online via video conferencing. This is time and place authorized for a workshop before the Nevada Game Control Board for possible action regarding regulations to be included in the report to Governor Joe Lombardo's office pursuant to Executive Order 2023-003, Section 3. Madam Secretary, has this workshop been properly noticed in accordance with Nevada's open meeting law?
Yes, it has.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Let's begin first with our public comment period.
This item is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters. Anyone wishing to address the board may do so at this time. Comments by each person are limited to 3 minutes as a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. If board members ask questions of the speaker, the time needed to address those questions will not count against the speaker's 3-minute time period. If speakers have any handouts or written copies of verbal comments to provide for the record, please hand them to the enforcement agent seated to your left in Las Vegas or behind you in Carson City.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Pursuant to Nevada open meeting law, matters brought to the attention of the board during public comment cannot be acted upon, but we are happy to hear comments from the public as well as comments from board members during public comment section of our agenda. Let's first go to Carson City. Is there anyone wishing to give public comment? Not seeing anyone. Let's go here to Las Vegas. Is there anyone willing to or desiring to give public comment at this time? Not seeing anyone. We will close the public comment section, which leads us now to our agenda. We have a couple of matters which hopefully you've all seen the agenda. And first of all, let me apologize a little bit. We started the meeting at 1:30 due to some legislative matters. I tried to have the agenda moved back to 2 o'clock. There was a little bit of open meeting law confusion, so I apologize if you showed up at 1:30 and had to waste a half hour of your day, but we will try to be as expedient as we can today in moving this matter forward. What we have in front of us is Governor Lombardo's Executive Order 003, which I'm actually quite proud to be involved with. I, along with many of the people who are here in the room watching on the television there, were involved in drafting many of these statutes and regulations over the years. And I think it's always time that we go through them and try to see if we can make them a little bit better, a little less burdensome, and of course, more workable for the industry while still maintaining effective regulation that this state desires and deserves. So with that, what I would like to do is first a little housekeeping matter. The reg regarding Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 14.045 sub 1, we're going to need to remove that from the agenda because further research by board has realized that that has to have a statutory component requiring that a regulation be in place. So for today, we will take that off the agenda, but doesn't mean that we can't revisit that later with properly agendized matter being removing or improving that particular section. The process used here today is something that's been going on for several months, and I would like to ask Mr. Jose Torres if you could step up to the podium, please introduce yourself and try to lay the table a little bit, straighten out for us how we got from the governor's executive order to where we are today at this workshop. If you could do that in a minute or two, that would be very appreciated for the record.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Hendrick, Member Watkins, and Judge Assad. I am Jose Torres, the Nevada Gaming Commission's Senior Research Specialist. The purpose of today's workshop, like previously stated, is to discuss and solicit input regarding amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission regulations for inclusion in the report for submission to the governor's office pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order 2023-003. Governor Joe Lombardo issued Executive Order 2023-003 in early January, requiring all executive branch entities to review existing state regulations and recommend improvements. But within that component, we need to have at least 10 marked for or notated for removal. Each division within the Gaming Control Board was tasked with finding regulations that could be improved or removed, finding those that have the most beneficial impact on licensees and the state of Nevada. Gaming Control Board Division Chief submitted various recommendations for improvement and removal since this process began. What you have in front of you today are the regulations identified through this process. There's one component that details the improvements, the other one that details the removals. These recommendations will be presented to the Nevada Nevada Gaming Commission at a future or upcoming meeting. Then we will summarize any industry comments or any comments presented today and submit those along with the report to the governor's office, again, in compliance with Executive Order 2023-003, more specifically Section 3 of the Executive Order. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Torres.
Thank you.
The format I'd like to pursue today is we have the chief or their designee from each division here with us today. They were the ones, as Mr. Torres spoke about, got together with all the board staff and came up with the recommendations that you see in front of you. Although those are recommendations from the board, that doesn't mean that the actual board members will have to follow those recommendations. But our goal here is today, as Mr. Torres stated, is to come up with a descending ranked order of at least 10 sections of regulations to be removed that we as a board members will recommend to the Gaming Commission. That doesn't mean today that those actual sections will either be improved or removed, because we still have to have a future meeting that will be necessary for properly noticing and going through a regular workshop and regular regulatory revision process. It does, however, mean that because of all of your input today, as well as all the staff input, that when we come around to doing that reg workshop and reg hearing and before the commission, that process should hopefully be very streamlined and will move very fast because of all of your input today. So what I'd like to do, and this will be a little disjointed because they're not divided by division, they're actually put in order of numerical order. And let's begin with those sections for improvement. And what I'd like to do is have the chief of the division or their designee who proposed the improvement revision to please turn on your microphone, state your name, your title, and give us a very short explanation on why you believe that section of the regulation should be improved. The first one we are going to, looking at the agenda, is Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 5.110, subsection 2. This came from the Tax and License Division.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Madam Secretary, for the record, Matt Wilkes, Deputy Chief of the Tax and License Division. Today I'm here to propose some slight changes to Regulation 5.110, paragraph 2. As noted in your handout that you could have got at the front door. Our proposal is to increase the regulation's current dollar threshold from $1,200 to $5,000 and to remove the verbiage non-restricted from the regulation so that all licensees, restricted and non-restricted, have the opportunity to log progressive meter readings greater than the approved threshold on a weekly basis, so as long as they are utilizing board-approved online slot metering systems. Per the current regulation, any progressive meter reading less than $1,200 is not required to be logged other than when it's initially placed on the floor. All restricted locations, non-restricted locations that do not operate an online slot metering system and have progressives greater than $1,200 are required to log this on a daily basis. Any non-restricted location that does operate an online slot metering system are required to log these meter readings over $1,200 every 7 days. With our recommendation, restricted licensees and non-restricted licensees that are not utilizing an online slot metering system would be exempt from logging daily progressive meter readings until that meter crossed over the $5,000 threshold. Additionally, all licensees, all non-restricted licensees and restricted licensees that are utilizing board-approved slot metering systems would only be required to log the progressive meter reading greater than $5,000 every 7 days. We believe this recommendation will alleviate unnecessary administrative burdens on the casino operators by allowing them to use less time and manpower to record the applicable progressive amounts on a daily basis and allow for all licensees, restricted and non-restricted, utilizing certain board-approved software to perform this process on a weekly basis.
Great. Thank you very much. Do we have any comment from members of the public regarding a amendment for improvement to NGC Regulation 5.110 subsection 2? I don't see anybody in Carson City or here in Las Vegas. Questions or comments from board members?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just think this is a common sense modification, and it allows also now the restricted licensees to enjoy that opportunity to log in once a week rather than daily. So it's a benefit to the Gaming Control Board, Tax and License Division, as well as the industry. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Member Watkins.
I agree and support the amendment as well.
All right, if there's no other comments or questions on that, actually, I did have one quick question. How was the amount of $5,000 arrived at?
The current mix and the proposed internal control procedures for Group 2 licensees already have a change in the threshold from 1,200 to 5,000 if they're utilizing these online systems in regards to how many people it takes to handle a payout. Additionally, there is a bill before the U.S. House of Representatives to increase the W2G. I believe they call it the slot jackpot tax, I believe is the term for it, from 1,200 to 5,000 as well.
Very good. Thank you. No other questions or comments on that. Let's move on to the next suggested regulation for improvement, which is Regulation 5.230 hosting centers.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Secretary Rupert. My name is Diane Presson. I'm with the Investigations Division. The Investigations Division proposes changes to NGC Regulation 5230 to bring the process for registration of hosting centers and their principals under NGC 4200. Because the NGC Regulation 5234 contains similar requirements for registration as what is set out in NGC 4200, and hosting centers provide technology-based services similar to service providers. Hosting centers were a good candidate to have a similar application and investigation process where they could be assigned to the registration services unit familiar with conducting similar registration investigations. The benefits of doing this include that the investigations now will be handled under the registration services unit by agents that are familiar with the registration process versus a licensure, and frees up non-restricted agents to work on non-restricted investigations that go on the agenda. It also allows registration services in the technology division to create a standard process to streamline both the investigation of the persons and the approval of the location. We'll also eliminate the need for annual reporting by the hosting center and submittal monitoring for the board, currently required by NGC 5237, as NGC 4200 requires registrants to report these changes in real time within 10 days of the change.
Very good. Thank you for that. Was this particular section for improvement something that the board staff was aware of and came up with, or is it something that you're hearing from the industry that they thought this should be updated?
So last year, we actually, it was when the commission proposed a passage of NGC 4200. And when we did that, it was with the eye to be able to use that regulation to streamline processes for other areas of the regulation where registration is required. And so this is just the first time that we are actually sought out a regulation that it could work with and are implementing the process.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone in the public, either here or in Carson City, that wants to have comments on NGC regulation, possible improvement to Regulation 5.230 regarding hosting centers? Seeing none, questions or comments from board members?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that explanation. It was very thorough, and I think the industry will appreciate this, and Gaming Control Board personnel will as well. So thank you so much.
I'm in support of this amendment as well. I think it allows allowing registration services to be handled by people familiar with it creates efficiencies, and I think this amendment standardizes processes as noted. Thank you.
Great. If there's no other comments or questions on 5.230, let's go on to possible improvement to NGC Regulation 6.080 audited financial statements. This came from the Audit Division.
Thank you, Chair and Gaming Control Board members. Thomasina Fremont, Chief of the Audit Division. This is pretty simple. We're proposing to remove the requirement that applicants submit an attestation letter from an independent accountant regarding the IC system during the licensing process.
Thank you. Similar question to I had to the last possible improvement. Was this something that the industry has asked the board to do, or something that the board staff has just come up with it on their own, that this would be helpful?
I would say this is in conjunction with the industry. When a applicant is submitting for licensure, they need to submit an internal control system. The audit division reviews that very thoroughly. Any questions that we have, we reach out to them. The original requirement was that the licensee also had an independent accountant review the IC system for compliance with the mix. By the time we receive that attestation letter, we are basically done with our review. So it's not useful, and it's a burden on the licensee. So this is in conjunction with them.
Great. That sounds exactly what the governor was talking about, something that's either redundant or outdated that we should simply get rid of if it's not necessary. So appreciate that. Anybody in the public who wishes to speak regarding NGC Regulation 6.080 regarding possible improvement? No one in Carson City or Las Vegas. Questions or comments from board members?
Yes, thank you for that. I think the industry would really appreciate the fact that they no longer need an independent accountant to duplicate what you already do. So that's one of those regs that's definitely in the redundant category.
I don't have anything further to add.
Great. If there's no other questions or comments regarding NGC possible improvement to 6.080, we'll move on to possible improvement to,
Excuse me, Chair.
yes.
I apologize. I have everything written down, but in a different order than when you had it written down.
Okay.
I'd like to say that was for 6090, paragraph 2E. May I please clarify what 6080, paragraph 6 actually is?
Yes, absolutely. Please do. I had the wrong page up as well. We started with 6.080 sub 6.
Yeah, the order that I had them in were I think the removals first. So
Okay, let's go to 6.080 sub 6 for improvement.
thank
Let's
you.
talk about that one first.
Yeah. So this one eliminates the need for some waivers for financial statement submissions. So there's two parts to this. The first one is for new licensees that are granted their license 120 days before a business year end. So licensees would no longer be required to request a waiver in order to submit their stub period financial statements with their first full business year financial statements. We get this request all the time. It is just an administrative burden, and we always approve it.
Very good. Thank you for that. Yes, that is much more of an improvement than what I was also originally looking at, which would be more of a removal, which we will get to in a few minutes. So are there questions? Again, let's open it back up to what Chief Fremont has talked about regarding possible improvement to NGC Regulation 6.080. Anybody from the public in Carson City or here in Las Vegas? Seeing nobody. Board members, do you wish to comment on the improvement to 6.080 as proposed by Chief Fremont? No questions or comments on that?
None by me, thank you.
Same here.
Great. All right.
Chair Hendrick, there's a second part to that.
Please.
So the second part to that is that this deals with license terminations. So licensees They'll only need to submit their financial statements that are going to cover the period since the prior financial statements were submitted. They only need to submit that now upon request with this proposal. Prior, they had to submit them. The reg said that they needed to be submitted. Licensees were continually requesting a waiver of that regulation. We always approved it because our audit was basically done by the time we received those audited and reviewed financial statements.
Thank you for that explanation. Let me be sure I've got this correct in front of me. So we have this section for deletion, and then we have a section for addition. Is that what I'm seeing here?
It actually amends the requirement because the requirement is that they submit those stub period financial statements. And the regulation allows for a waiver of that. So licensees have been submitting for that waiver. We approve that waiver always, and then they no longer need to submit it. So what we're doing is basically saying they only need to submit it upon request. So it's just amending the requirement.
Understood. How often would you think those requests for waivers come in?
Every time a license termination happens.
Okay, very good. All right. This sounds like it would be appropriate amendment to improve NGC Regulation 6.080. Very good. Other questions or comments from board members?
No.
None by me. Thank you.
No questions or comments from me.
Okay, thank you very much. That moves us on to then possible improvement to NGC Regulation 6.090. And that is subsection 11. Very good. Chief Fremont, is that yours as well?
This is also ours. 609.011, this is really just changing the logistics of how this is done. So when a licensee submits an amendment to their IC system, in the old days, we allowed them to just submit the amended page because they were all hard copies. But now because they're electronic, we prefer to have just a brand new system submitted to us because we're not that technologically advanced to pull out an one page from an electronic copy. So it's easier to have a brand new submission and just replace it.
Thank you for that explanation. So it sounds like both the burden of paperwork from the licensee standpoint and from the board standpoint would be eliminated if this improvement was made to 6.090, correct?
Well, they currently submit them in electronic format anyway. So we changed that a while ago. But we used to allow them to submit just the one-page amendment, but it was hard for us to take a PDF copy and pull a page out, put the new page in. It was a little complicated and time-consuming. So we just request that they now submit, if they have a one-page amendment, submit the entire electronic IC system. And so we put that in its place. It's just easier.
Very good. Thank you for the explanation. Anyone in the public here in Las Vegas or Carson City wishing to comment on potential improvement to NGC Regulation 6.090 sub 11? Seeing no one in either room, are there questions or comments from board members?
So I think this, correct me if I'm wrong, it benefits the industry because if they don't have a CFO, it allows them to move the process along.
So that was the second part of this one. We also just added the wording because right now they need to submit something that's signed by the CFO regarding these amendments. And the change that we've made now, because not all licensees have a CFO, we've also want to add the wording CFO or comparable position.
Very good. Thank you for that.
I think this creates efficiencies or less difficulties for the board. So I'm in support.
So Chief Fremont, is there actually 3 pieces of the improvement to 6.090 sub 11, or is there 2?
There are 2.
2, okay. CFO or comparable position
Is the second piece.
is the second piece. Gotcha. And then the filing, as you explained, much simpler to just have it one piece rather than try to separate some hard document.
Correct.
Very good. All right. No other questions or comments being heard on potential improvement NGC Regulation 6.090 sub 11. We'll move on to potential improvement to NGC Regulation 20.030 subsection 7. Again, I believe that's yours from Audit Chief Fremont.
So 20.0307, this is just a housekeeping one. The current deadline for the submission of the NGC 32 is actually the 15th of the month. The regulation still states it's the 24th, so this is just a cleanup.
Thank you for that. Do we know why that hasn't been changed prior to today's hearing?
No.
No, just one of those things that's sitting there.
Yeah.
Has the industry been following the 15th?
Yes.
Gotcha. Very good. Anybody here or in Carson City wishing to comment on proposed amendment to NGC Regulation 20.030? Seeing no one, are there questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. None by me.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Did I state the wrong one? No, that's 20.030 sub 7, correct?
Right.
Correct, yes. Okay, nothing else on that. Brings us to NGC Regulation 20.070, possible improvement, again suggested by the Audit Division.
So this actually mirrors the same changes in 6060 paragraph 7, but this one's for disseminators. So again, if you have a new licensee or if you have a license termination, you will not need to submit a request for a waiver in order to deal with the financial statement issues. But there's a third component of this one as well. And this one just eliminates the requirement for duplicate copies for the financial statements. We changed that a long time ago in the 6080 paragraph 6, but it did not get changed for the disseminators.
Thank you for the explanation. Have the disseminators continued to have to do both of them because it wasn't changed, or have they been following what the rest of the licensees were doing?
Well, if they submit it electronically, it just makes sense to submit one. So this
Gotcha.
is just cleanup in the reg.
Very good. Thank you for that. And I'm assuming everybody asked for a waiver the same as they did on the other one.
Correct.
Yes, thank you. Any questions or comments from the public here or in Carson City regarding potential improvement to NGC Regulation 20.070? Seeing no one, are there questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. So basically, the industry benefits again from this.
That is correct.
Thank you.
I agree, and think it reduces the burden on licensees.
Very good. If there's no other questions or comments regarding 20.070, that brings us to potential improvement being recommended to NGC Regulation 23.040 regarding accounting for transactions between card table bank and card room bank. Again, this came from a suggestion from the Audit Division, Chief Fremont.
That's correct. So this is another one to eliminate the need for a regulation waiver. The current regulation allows for this to be done upon written approval by the chair. We never deny it. So we're just saying as long as they follow what's in the reg, they can use a casino cage in place of a card room bank. There's not a problem with that. So we have no issue with that.
Thank you for the explanation. I'm assuming that because they've had to have board written approval, it slows down this process by possibly a week or 2 weeks in order to get them back that response.
It does. Yeah. It's just all an administrative burden all the way around. They have to draft the letter to us. We have to receive the letter. Then we have to draft the approval. Then we have to get it signed. And you're right. It does take a few weeks to get that done.
Very good. Then I'm certainly in support of anything that can save trees and save time, both at the same juncture. So killing two birds with one stone. Very good. Are there questions or comments from the public here or in Carson City regarding potential amendment to improve NGC Regulation 23.040? Seeing none, are there questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. So this basically helps the industry by allowing them to eliminate some labor and costs and having a bank separate from the cage. And it helps the Gaming Control Board in terms of man hours and alleviating some of the duties and responsibilities the chairman already has.
Absolutely. This just eliminates an administrative burden.
Thank you.
I don't have anything additional to add.
All right, so that brings us to our last suggested revision, and that is to NGC Regulation 26.060 regarding commission and taxes. Again, this is from the Audit Division. Thank you very much. Chief Fremont, do you want to explain this one?
Sure. This is another housekeeping issue. Remember, this is for parimutuel as opposed to off-track parimutuel. This amends the regulation to reflect the correct rates that are in the statute, which is NRS 464040. Parimutuel commissions cannot exceed 18%, and the tax rate on those commissions is 3%. Currently, the regulation reflects the wrong rates.
Understood. Have the licensees, though, been paying the correct statutory rate?
We don't currently have any parimutuel tracks here in Nevada. So the only track we have, I believe, is up in Ely? Is it the Ely track? And they don't take parimutuel wagers. There's no parimutuel pool. So this is really just housekeeping, but everything we have right now is off-track parimutuel. So we don't have parimutuel.
Understood. And I believe this statutory change was made quite a long time ago, but based on your explanation, it makes sense on why it was never updated, because there's no one to pay the tax anyway. But if they had been, they would have paid the proper statutory, even
I'm
though
sure.
the regulatory amount wasn't
Yeah.
updated.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, good catch. Might as well update it. And it's good that we're going through this process to find those type of things. So thank you for that. Is there anyone from the public wishing to comment on potential improvement to 26.060 Nevada Gaming Commission regulation? Seeing none, are there questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. So just for those who may not be familiar with some of the terminology, when you refer to parimutuel, you're talking about a pooled system of betting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this definitely would benefit the Gaming Control Board and the industry as well, correct?
If we had parimutuel pools here in Nevada, yes. But the
Thank you.
pool, like I said, the pools that we do have are the off-track parimutuel pools with tracks outside the state.
Right. Thank you.
I'm in support of this as a housekeeping matter.
All right, thank you very much. If there's no other questions or comments on potential improvement to NGC Regulation 26.060, let me open it back up again before we close the improvement section. Did anyone in the public or board members have anything else to add regarding the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, if I'm counting correctly, possible improvements to NGC regulations? Seeing none, we will go to our number 2 for possible action on the agenda in accordance with Section 2. Madam Secretary, would you read that into the record? She
Chair,
might.
did you want to take a motion on the improvements or do that at the end?
No, I think we'll do them both at the end. Thank you for asking, though. I'll read this into the record. In accordance with Section 2 of Governor Joe Lombardo's Executive Order 2023.003, consideration and possible recommendation of the Nevada Gaming Commission of specified sections of the following Nevada Gaming Commission regulations identified for removal. As I noted earlier, we took out NGC Regulation 14.045 for possible removal because that needed to stay in due to statute. I will also say that pursuant to the governor's order, as I mentioned earlier, and as Mr. Torres mentioned, the board needs to make recommendations to the commission, who will then make recommendations to the governor in descending order of importance, a minimum of 10 possible sections of regulations to be ranked. We are very fortunate that board staff, along with each division and division chiefs, have put together what they believe is their ranked order. So that hopefully will save the board some time today. So we thank you very much for the work on that. And what I'd like to do is we're going to take these in order and do the same thing where we ask the chief or their designee to give a very brief explanation, and then we will talk about why the potential section should be removed as a recommendation to the commission. Let's begin with NGC Regulation 3.100, employee reports. That came from the Investigations Division.
Hello, Chair, Board Members, Executive Secretary. My name is Crystal Keel. I'm a Special Agent with the Investigations Division. As you're aware, Regulation 3100 is the employee report, or better known as Key Employee Report. The regulation as it's written applies to all non-restricted licensees, including manufacturers, distributors, and so on. They must submit a key employee report to the board, specifically the investigations division, twice a year. That's March 31st and September 30th. Once the investigation receives the key employee report, we have an employee who manually updates Alpha, our our database system. The reports are then processed to be scanned into our record keeping system, which is YODA. Within the past 2 years, the investigations division is processing over 1,900 reports a year. As you're aware, the board is currently in the middle of the alpha migration and investigations. The alpha migration and the 3,100 report requirements are quite detailed and will result in a complex feature that's both time consuming and costly to create in our new SAGE system. After analysis was done with the investigations division, it was determined that removing regulation 3100 shouldn't cause any potential regulatory risk, as because there are other notifications and reports that licensees submit to the board. I personally recall during the Gaming Law Conference in November 2022, a licensee mentioned during the conference that doing the 3,100 report is not only time consuming and costly for the industry. So I personally believe that there's going to be a positive feedback from the industry as well as a positive economic impact from the industry as well. Now, with the impact for the board, we're no longer going to need to have an investigative staff member manually enter this information into our system. That's going to free them up on working on other assignments, such as processing licensing applications so it can get assigned out to agents sooner. As well as our records department will no longer have to scan all those into our record keeping system. Plus, there will not be a need to create and implement future costly, complex features in our SAGE system to handle these reports.
Thank you for the very thorough explanation. Is there anyone in the public here or in Carson City that wishes to speak regarding potential recommendation of removal of the section specified, not the entire regulation, of course, but the section specified by the Investigations Division? Yes, Mr. Dorsey, please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Member Watkins, Member Assad, Madam Secretary. For the record, Darren Dorsey, Executive Director of the Association of Gaming Equipment Manufacturers, AGEM. On this specific item, Mr. Chairman, we would say AGEM has no issues or concerns with any of the items for improvement or those items listed for deletion or removal as set forth in the agenda. I'm also joined at the podium in Carson City by our outside counsel, Dan Reeser. There is one slight comment that, a small comment AGEM may wish to make on 5225. We will wait till that comes up in due course. But most importantly, we applaud the board's action in this regard. And we think this is a great first step and many other steps to come. And as we had at the workshop in March, we will be bringing forth what AGEM believes are some other additional items that could be eliminated, revised, improved, but we want to work with you, your teams, your chiefs on that process because it will require commission approval. Is that going to be a joint petition? Is that going to be something that another workshop is done? But we want to work through that with you and your teams in the next probably month or so, and we'll get that list to you. But we want to give you that update, but more specifically to today's agenda. No issues or concerns, and AGEM on behalf of the supplier sector appreciates and applauds the effort to try to eliminate and further improve, maybe delete unnecessary, duplicative, or maybe outdated regulations to improve the conditions for Nevada gaming operators and licensees.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. And you are correct that we will be, as I mentioned earlier, having another reg workshop. I'm gathering that it might be a long one. It might be a 2-day, it might be a week long, but we certainly welcome at that time. It's not like everything has to be brought up today. So we certainly will welcome new suggestions at that time and would hope that you would work with the particular division before we get to the actual hearing. So that might speed up that process as well.
That's our plan, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Reeser, did you have anything to add?
I do, Chair Hendrick, Member Watkins, and Assad, Madam Secretary Dan Reeser with Fenimore on behalf of AGEM, and also making comment on behalf of a number of the law firms, brick and mortar and restricted and slot route operators. We significantly applaud the removal of the 3,100 report. I have to tell you, in a given month, especially the 2 months that this is due, the number of calls I get from compliance managers about preparing this report, navigating it, and trying to answer why do we need to prepare this report given all of the other touch points. This is an area where I think you reduce significant costs to the industry across the board for both your non-restricted, your restricted, and your manufacturers and distributors. And I heartily support this and hope that it would be accepted by the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Reeser, and thank you both, as well as the AGM organization. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there's many people either here in the room, here in Carson City, or online watching who drafted many of these regulations. And certainly want to point out that Mr. Reeser is definitely one of the people at the top of the list of having done much of that drafting. So your comments on what will speed up and help the industry are always welcome. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on potential removal of the specific section of NGC Regulation 3.100? All right. Any questions or comments from board members?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The key for me is that this information regarding the employee reports is already captured in NGC 09. So this is certainly duplicative, and it benefits both the industry tremendously, as Mr. Reeser just enunciated, and it also alleviates a lot of unnecessary work for the Gaming Control Board. So I'd also like to commend the governor for commencing this initiative and this process. Thank you very much.
I'm in support of the removal of the requirement of this report, as the judge mentioned, as this, because this information is already captured. Thus, removal creates time savings for both the board and the industry.
Thank you. If there's no other questions or comments regarding 3.100, let's move on to the next potential regulation section for possible removal. And I have NGC Regulation 5.025, and I'm looking for that here in my packet. Which page should I be looking at? Dag Brennig, do you see that?
I believe it's page 9, Chair.
Page 9. I see 5.105 on page 9. Is 5025?
Chair, I believe 5025 is to be addressed later in the list. The number 2 for our priority for removal is listed as Reg 51058, and that can be found on page 9.
Okay, thank you for that, Chief Barbie. All right, well, don't let me forget in case I jump over 5.025. Gotcha. I was reading off of the workshop agenda and it's going just in order. Is that the question? Yes. Okay, so we're on possible removal of a section of NGC Regulation 5.105. That recommendation comes from the Enforcement Division.
Thank you, Chair. Christy Torkerson for the record. The Enforcement Division recommends the removal of Regulation 5.105, Duties of Licensee, subsection 8. This regulatory requirement involves a non-restricted licensee's submittal of a monthly employee hire report on or before the 15th day of each month. Currently, the written report must contain the name, gaming registration number, position held, and date of hire for each gaming employee hired during the preceding month. The justification for removal is that the board's gaming employee registration system does have a user report, which can generate the same data in lieu of licensee reporting. Therefore, repealing this provision would eliminate a reporting requirement for the industry, streamline a portion of the employee registration process, and also reallocate board manpower to oversee more critical aspects of the employee registration process.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Torgerson. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak regarding possible removal of the specified section in Regulation 5.105, subsection 8? Seeing no one here or in Carson City, are there questions or comments from board members?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This one's pretty straightforward. It's just a written and outdated requirement due to the online registering process we have now. So no longer do you have to write a written report. You can just go online and take care of what you need to do by our technology that we have today. Thank you.
I don't have anything additional to add and agree.
All right, if there's no other questions or comments regarding that, we will move on then to the next possible section for removal, which is NGC Regulation 5.200 subsection 3 subsection A. And again, that came from the Enforcement Division. Chief?
Thank you, Chair. The Enforcement Division recommends the removal of Nevada Gaming Control Board Regulation 5.200 subsection 3A, which requires each licensee operating a gaming salon on the property of a resort hotel to provide telephonic and electronic mail notification to the Nevada Gaming Control Board each time a gaming salon is opened and closed for play. It should be noted that as of January 2022, there were 11 licensed private gaming salon locations operating, a cumulative total of 65 salons in Nevada. As there are several other operational requirements within Regulation 5.200, we wish to remove the licensee notification requirement and allow locations to run their gaming operations without this high degree of oversight. If this regulation is repealed, licensees must still maintain all internal records in support of the regulation, random gaming salon inspections, and board audits.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Tell me, if this subsection 3A were to be removed, does the licensee still have a burden to tell the board anything at the time it happens, or merely keep a log?
Merely keep a log pursuant to 5200. And if we've looked at this, I believe that 5200 was adopted in January of 2002, and we've come so far as an industry. I think there was a lot of fear, with gaming behind closed doors based on the public policy for the state. And the licensees have done a tremendous job, in enforcing and supervising these operations. So as time has permitted, we've tried to ease some of these robust requirements. And I think this will be a good move for the industry. And
Is the licensees continuing to actually make these phone calls now, and they're calling and speaking to the Enforcement Division? Are Enforcement Division agents going out there, or are you simply relying on video surveillance?
so it used to be that we were actually viewing from the board offices. And so when they called in or sent an email in, we had the ability to spot check these operations if time permitted. But as we've noticed over time, that's really something that we haven't had any major issues with the industry on over so many years. And it is disruptive for calls of service when, you may have an arrest out there to be taking this call, of notification when it's not as critical. And I think it does, distract the industry as well from service to their customers and also the compliance issues that we do need on paper.
Thank you for that. And I would agree, we've had a few technological advances in the last 20 plus years. So
We have.
thank you. Anyone here or in Carson City wishing to speak regarding potential removal of NGC Regulation 5.2003A specifically? Anyone have any comments? Don't see anybody. Questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. For those who may not be familiar with the particular verbiage, a gaming salon is a private area gaming setup for what you would call high rollers typically. So this is a very welcomed removal of a regulation by the industry, because it's really quite burdensome. Every time you get a high roller in and you want to accommodate them, you have to previously would telephonically and electronically try to email the gaming control board. And now all you have to do is keep a little private log, and it's a tremendous benefit for the industry. So I'm sure they're very, very pleased with this particular removal. Thank you.
I actually have a question. Sorry, turn my mic off. I actually have a question for Chief Torgerson. Under what circumstances are these logs reviewed?
So the logs that are actually on site are reviewed by our audit division during their normal audit process. Also, the Enforcement Division, our operations unit, we have a new endeavor to be going out and spot checking these as well. With this in mind, if we're going to alleviate this, we're going to want to do some other things for proper oversight and supervision. So my vision, my intent would be that our field services agents would go out and do regular checks at the properties. They would maybe stop and check in on these salons as well. And then in addition, we have a surveillance agent that's dedicated to our division. And that individual will incorporate these salon checks and do audits as well on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. If there's no other questions or comments regarding potential removal of NGC Regulation 5.200 sub 3A, we will then move on to our next potential removal suggestion, which is NGC Regulation 6.090 subsection 2E regarding internal control of Group 1 licensees. That must have come from audit.
Thank you, Chair. Thomasina Fremont, Chief of the Audit Division for the record. This is the one that I brought up before. This is 6090 paragraph 2, paragraph E. This removes the requirement that applicants submit an attestation letter from an independent accountant regarding the IC system during the licensing process.
Yes, and you did a very good job of explaining it earlier. And so I didn't have any other questions on that. Did anyone in the public here or in Carson City have questions or comments regarding NGC Regulation 6.090 sub 2E? Seeing none, questions or comments from board members?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is simply a redundant reg, so much needed removal. Thank you.
I don't have anything additional to add, and I'm in agreement.
All right. Thank you. Next I see is, well, I had 5.025. Is that correct? All right. I'm a page behind. This is the one that keeps eluding me here. It's Keno games. Yes, all right. Potential removal of a section of NGC Regulation 5.025. This again came from audit. Chief Fremont.
Thank you, Chair. Currently, Keno games that have a payout that exceed $250,000 require administrative approval. We do not have this requirement in any other revenue area. We also feel that the bankroll has been reworked several years ago. So we feel that there are guardrails in place for that. It's captured through the bankroll. And it's inconsistent with the way that we handle the other revenue sections. So we'd like to remove that administrative approval for that.
Thank you, Chief Fremont. Do you know how long this amount has been set at $250,000?
Well, I've been here 29 years and
It's been at least 29 years.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you for that. And I believe you're saying that there's no other progressive that has that cap.
We don't have that in any other revenue area. No.
Any reason why the board has not come around to in removing or increasing this cap from the industry or from the board side?
I really don't know. I just think that with Governor Lombardo's order, it just gave us an opportunity to really look at this stuff. And so I think we were just going business as usual. And so as we were fulfilling this requirement, we went, this really doesn't make any sense. This probably was a long time ago before the larger payouts were in the other revenue sections. And as they evolved over time, we just didn't see the connection with the requirement that we have in Keno compared to that. And then, it just was overlooked, I believe. The dots are being connected now, I think.
Perfect. And I think that's exactly what the governor was asking for, is let's go back and look at these kind of things and decide if they still make sense in the year of 2023. So thank you for that. If there's any questions or comments from the public, especially anybody from the industry who wants to enlighten us a little bit on why nobody's ever asked to increase the Keno cap from $250,000, I'd be interested in hearing that. If there's not, we'll go to questions or comments from board members.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Chief Fremont for that thorough explanation. It makes a lot of sense. This was a completely unnecessary reg. So thank you for that.
I agree that these approvals are no longer necessary.
All right, then that brings us to NGC Regulation 5.225 sub 19 regarding wagering accounts. And this came from the Enforcement Division. Or was it audit? You think?
Chair, I believe it was
5225.
the audit.
I feel like this is the audit division show.
Sure sounds like it. Let's go back. NGC Regulation 5.225 subsection 19. Am I correct? Wagering accounts?
Correct.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Chief.
So this would remove the requirement that licensees submit their wagering account rules for approval prior to implementation. When we first started having the wagering accounts, we felt that this was necessary, but as time has gone by, they are submitted to us, we review them and approve them, but we figured out what we're doing, the industry has figured out what they're doing. This isn't necessary anymore. And if enforcement does have, because we've partnered with enforcement on this, if they do have a concern where they have an investigation going on, they will actually just request the rules from the licensee itself during the investigation. So again, it's administrative.
Very good. Thank you. Questions or comments from the public here or in Carson City? Seeing none. Questions or comments from board members?
None by me. It's pretty
Oh,
straightforward.
sorry, I jumped. I'm a little faster than
I
you
would
today,
just-
Mr. Dorsey. Please, was
For the
this the
record.
one that you wanted to speak on?
I did, and by the
Yes.
explanation and I'm sorry, for the record, Darren Dorsey, Executive Director of HM, Mr. Chairman. I referenced it earlier, but seeing the specific subsection and the more discussion from the chief, there are no comments that answers the question. We're just making sure or clarification that larger parts of the regulation were not being adopted because certain definitions would go by the wayside if they didn't exist in 5225.
Perfect.
No other questions or comments, so thank you for that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Dorsey. And yes, we're trying to be as surgical as possible rather than take out big sections. Personally, it would have been a goal of mine if we could find something that's big enough to help regulate effectively the industry, but still get rid of something that's burdensome. If it was larger, that's fine. But we've really been tasked to be as surgical as possible so that we didn't cause any unintended consequences by removing something that may actually be needed. Are there any other questions or comments from the public regarding NGC Regulation 5.225 sub 19? Nope. Now let's go to questions or comments from board members.
None by, none by me. Thank you.
None for me. None for me either.
All right. The next one on the agenda was NGC Regulation 14.045. And as I mentioned, we removed that from the agenda. So we're now going to NGC Regulation 5.215, possible removal of a section of that regulation. And I believe that came from the Technology Division. Chief Barbie.
Good afternoon, Jim Barbie. I'm the Chief of the Technology Division, and Chair, this is the actual removal of an entire regulation.
So you made me just give that long speech about we didn't find one, and yet you did. You went and found one. We're actually got the chance to remove an entire section of a regulation 5.215. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great.
Admittedly, though, I think 3100 is an entire regulation as well. That might carry a little more weight. That's why we hope that one to be first on the list. Reg 5215 currently requires licensees to provide an access list, establish a revolving fund, and provide monitoring equipment for system games. System games are system-based and system-supported games. The intention of this change is to treat a system game as any other gaming device, and that would be subject to the requirements of Reg 14 and the other statutes and regulations related to a gaming device. The additional goal of the removal of this regulation is to lower the regulatory burden of offering a system game, potentially making them more attractive to offer by the industry.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. Do you believe this has come from the industry? Have they brought this up to the Technology Division multiple times, or is this something that you as personnel of the board have seen?
This would be, yes, this has been a note with the industry over the years. And then I'm going to speak about Reg 14105 in just a moment. But those combined, each time that either a licensee wishes to offer or a manufacturer wishes to install, there's an administrative process um, that is becoming a bit cumbersome. So the industry has commented on that in the past.
Great. Thank you for that. Do you believe this will speed up any of the lab approval process by getting rid of sections of 5.215, and then we'll talk about Reg 14105?
There's not necessarily an approval process for 5215, Mr. Chair. This is an obligation on the licensee to provide access listings, which has an administrative process on the back end for us to monitor, as well as the licensee to create that access list. So we're removing some administration on both sides of the fence. It also removes the requirement to establish a revolving fund. It's a $10,000 fund that if I am a licensee wish to offer a system game, I have to have that fund on file such that the board can come out, investigate or inspect my system game and pay for the cost of that investigation through that revolving fund. And then it also requires certain monitoring equipment. The current regulation does. That monitoring equipment's unnecessary for the board to have at this time. We have access to that information through other back of house systems that we can inspect or review if we wish to.
It sounds to me like if the board personnel aren't having to waste time on all of this, which is unnecessary, that would free them up to certainly work on other more important matters, which would end up being more timely response to the industry.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone in the public here in Carson City wishing to speak regarding NGC Regulation 5.215? Mr. Reeser, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Hendricks, members Watkins and Assad, Madam Secretary Dan Reeser with AGEM and other manufacturers. I concur with Chief Barbie and applaud the removal of 5215. My recollection at the time this was adopted is we were going into the new world of system supported and system based games. And at the time, the thought was we needed this additional overlay for those types of systems games. And I think over time, as Chief Barbie's pointed out, not necessary, and just treating these systems the same as a gaming device, which is what they are, will, I think, allow for streamlining, and we support this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reeser. Appreciate the historical background on why this would have been put in place by you and by both Chief Barbie explaining that. So if there's no other questions or comments from the public, we will now go to board members for questions or comments.
Thank you, Chairman. So essentially, bottom line, this makes it easier for licensees to submit their system-based games, correct?
In this instance, Judge, the licensee will not have to notify the board or submit anything for approval as far as offering a system-based game. They'll be able to offer it the same as they would, let's say, a slot machine, a table game.
Great,
Provided
thank you.
the system is approved.
Right, and thank you for that thorough explanation.
I think Chief Barbie and his team has done a good job of identifying this reg for elimination. So I wanted to say that, but also I agree, as Chief Barbie has stated, that it lowers the regulatory burden on system games and in support.
Very good. If there's no other questions or comments on that particular regulation, we will now go to possible removal of a subsection of NGC Regulation 14.015. Chief Barbie, I believe this is yours as well.
Good afternoon, Jim Barbie for the record. Yes, Regulation 14105 is a companion to Regulation 5215, and Regulation 5215, licensees required to do certain to establish the fund list and monitoring equipment. Reg 14105 requires the licensee then to get that specific installation approved. This removal removes the pre-installation inspection and approval for each licensee wishing to offer a system game. The allows the industry to take advantage of the various networking options available to them, including cloud services, and have a greater degree of agility in the operation of system games. The burden remains on the operator to exercise sound judgment in the conduct of gaming operations to prevent incidents that may reflect negatively on the reputation of Nevada or the gaming industry. As with the previous suggested change, this lowers the regulatory burden of offering a system game, potentially making them more attractive to the industry. One comment that we were going down this path. System games were a hot topic some years ago. As with most regulatory approaches, we took a conservative approach when we were crafting these regulations. And over time, we found that um, the industry has matured to the point and the systems have matured to the point that they don't require the significant level of regulatory scrutiny that they perhaps did in the past. So this change makes sense based on 2023 as opposed to, let's say, ever this regulation.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Questions or comments from the public here in Carson City regarding NGC Regulation 14105? Mr. Reeser.
Chair, members of the board, Dan Reeser, again, ditto 14105 to my comments on 215.
Very good, very succinct. Anybody else wishing to comment from the public on 14105? Seeing none, questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. That was a very thorough explanation. I have nothing to add except that there is a beneficial economic impact to the industry here as well, correct?
Yes, I would say so, Judge. This allows them to have this product more expeditiously offered without the regulatory overhead of having to get that particular installation approved ahead of time. This also allows the industry to potentially make changes to that network architecture once the game has been installed without getting that change also. So again, it offers them a bit more agility in the manner in which they can offer their product.
Excellent. Thank you.
I agree that this offers licensees increased flexibility and reduces the regulatory burden in support.
Very good. Thank you all. Let's move on now to potential removal of a section of NGC Regulation 14.210, subsection 2. Again, Technology Chief Barbie.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Jim Barbie with the Technology Division. Regulation 14.2102, the current requirement is that a restricted licensee must obtain approval for the operation of a promotional device. It's understood that the promotional device itself must be approved as stated in the regulation. This request is to remove this requirement, which will allow restricted locations to operate promotional devices without the prior approval of the board, removing the administrative burden on both the licensee and the board to approve such operations, and afford the restricted licensees greater flexibility in the offering of promotional devices and tournaments. The licensees, again, remain obligated to offer such promotional games in accordance with the provisions of Reg 5 regarding suitable methods of operation, so the board still can effectively regulate in this area.
Thank you for the explanation. Can you give me like a real world example on why this would be slowing down licensees? And have they called you or other divisions to ask the same question? Why do I need this?
Yes, we've received questions, especially from newer restricted licensees. The current regulation requires, and the current regulation states to the effect that a non-restricted licensee has to have the promotional device approved, and a restricted licensee has to have both promotional device approved and the operation of the promotional device. So we're treating two licensees somewhat differently. There's a greater level of responsibility placed on restricted location to have the operation of the promotion approved. By removing that requirement, it'll allow those restricted licensees to be more creative with their promotional offerings. And these are typically done in the form of tournaments. A real world example, Mr. Chair, would be you have a restricted location. They wish to install two promotional devices based on a birthday promotion or the month of March, or it's spring, or whatever the theme might be for that promotion. And maybe that was a marketing concept that they came up with I don't want to say at the last minute, but they came up, they would like to offer it next week. Unfortunately, due to that administrative process, they would first have to submit that information to the board. We would review the promotion. We review that in conjunction with our enforcement division to ensure that there are no concerns with the rules of that offering. And then we would turn around and issue an approval. Just the administrative process alone may take a week or two. We've found over the years that the risk really doesn't exist. There's not been a lot of changes necessary with the rules for these types of tournaments. So the thought here was, let's remove that requirement, give the operator, those restricted operators, a little more flexibility in their operations. Again, holding them accountable ultimately under Reg 5.
Sure, thank you. How often do you see these kind of requests coming in from either non-restricted or restricted? Is this a weekly, bi-weekly? How fast do you get these?
I would say from restricted locations, we get maybe half a dozen a month for various types of tournaments that they would like to offer.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from the public here or in Carson City regarding potential removal of a section of NGC Regulation 14.210 subsection 2? Seeing none, are there questions or comments from board members?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's an unnecessary reg, bottom line, so I thank you for that explanation.
I think this removal balances accountability with efficiencies in support.
Great. No other questions or comments on that section. Let's move on to NGC Regulation 14.170 subsection 1B2, possible removal of a subsection of that regarding marking, registration, and distribution of gaming devices. This came as well from the Technology Division recommendation.
Good afternoon, Jim Barbie with the Technology Division. The current requirement is that program storage media, this is the physical media that stores control programs within a gaming device, be labeled with a product approval number. This is one that the industry groans whenever they wish to change whatever the media type is. That media may be too small to physically label, or that media may be reprogrammable. For example, hard drive that's contained in the device. This is an antiquated requirement that was based on EEPROMs. They were the sole source of storage media. Modern storage media comes in all forms and sizes, making it impractical to physically label the media. Alternative methods to visually inspecting the label printed on the media exist to validate the media contents. For example, the media contents can be validated via attendance screens or via particular application interfaces.
Thank you for the explanation. Are there questions or comments from public here or in Carson City regarding this particular reg and possible removal of a subsection? Mr. Dorsey, did you have anything to add to what Mr. Barbie was saying about the difficulty of trying to fit even the title of these onto media? I hate to put you on the spot, but you're here.
Again, for the record, Darren Dorsey, Executive Director of AGEM. No specific added comments to what the chief's talking about, but I think just in this discussion, I think throughout this, we've seen that there's a lot of regs, there's a lot of process, there's a lot of back and forth that goes on in the day-to-day operation that really don't align with the technology that's available today, how the operators operate their facilities, and how suppliers are getting those products to those facilities. So any kind of way that you can reduce, even if that's 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, back and forth with any division, if it's unnecessary, is welcome on behalf of the supplier industry.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments regarding this particular reg? Any questions or comments from board members?
None by me. That was a thorough explanation by the chief. Thank you.
I'm in support, as I think this requirement is outdated as well. I agree with the chief.
All right, that brings us now then to potential removal of a section of NGC Regulation 14.160, duplication of program storage media. Chief Barbie.
Good afternoon, Jim Barbie for the record. Regulation 14.160, the requirement, this particular requirement originated when most, if not all, program storage media was on EEPROMs. If you're not familiar, an EEPROM is a small chip, perhaps an inch and a half long. With the numerous types of media and methods of programming these types of storage media, it's become an administrative burden on the licensee to comply with this process. I have not heard personal complaints, but anecdotally, I have heard having this approved is somewhat cumbersome. It's fundamentally an administrative process that does not enhance the board's ability to regulate gaming. Licensees, again, are required to conduct their gaming operations in accordance with Reg 5. So I don't believe that removing this requirement will impact again, impact our ability to regulate or pose a risk to gaming.
Thank you, Chief. Are there questions or comments from the public here or in Carson City regarding NGC Regulation 14160? Seeing none, are there questions or comments from board members?
Thank you. None by me.
None for me either.
All right, that brings us then, I believe that's most of the technology recommendations. That brings us now to surveillance standards for non-restricted licensees, standard 12, subsection 9, which I believe the recommendation came from enforcement.
Thank you, Chair. Enforcement Division recommends the removal of Surveillance Standard 12, subsection 9, which requires non-restricted licensees to provide written notification when any portion of a surveillance system is changed from an analog to DVR format. It's been noted by staff that this notification is no longer needed because licensees are already providing the appropriate notification to the board when they request a surveillance inspection of their new DVR system. To further enhance efficiency and remove the duplication of our notification requirements, we wish to streamline this regulation in support of industry and operations.
Great, thank you, Chief. Are there questions or comments from the public regarding surveillance standard 12? Seeing none, are there questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank Chief Torgerson for that thorough explanation. Essentially, this is kind of an outdated situation. So I'm in support of it. Thank you.
I'm in support as I think this reduces regulatory burden as well.
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, I'm guessing this one's been in practice for quite some time. If we're talking about going from analog to DVR, it's
You're
the
correct.
old debate between beta and VHS, right?
Right.
Okay, great. Let's move on then to surveillance standards for non-restricted licensees, standard 1, subsection 2.
Thank you, Chair. Surveillance Standard 1, subsection 2 states that all category A and B licensees must possess the capability to monitor and record a general overview of activities occurring in each slot change booth. Although division staff have queried numerous non-restricted locations to ensure that slot change booths are a thing of the past, if one were to exist, we would ask that the current surveillance coverage be implemented as an industry practice in lieu of formalized surveillance.
Very good update. So you're saying that our standards still require that a video camera be focused on a slot change booth. Where those cameras focus now, have we allowed them to not focus on a place that doesn't exist, or are they still focused on a piece of carpet and nothing's there?
So the spirit of this is actually to remove that whole surveillance requirement because there's really no slot change booth. So like, as you said, I don't think that there's any compliance mechanism for this now because it really doesn't exist in the industry.
Very good. This one sounds perfectly aligned with what the governor is asking for. If we're making a surveillance system point at something that doesn't exist because it's 20 or 30 years old, seems like a good time to fix it. Are there questions or comments from the public here or in Carson City regarding standard 1 surveillance system coverage? Seeing none, let's go to board members for questions or comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually old enough to remember the change booths, and it's a good thing that they no longer exist. Thank you for that explanation.
I think the chair summed it up well, and I don't have anything additional to add.
All right, that brings us, I believe, to the third surveillance standard for non-restricted licensees, standard 1.101, subsection 5.
Thank you.
I said that wrong, 1010, subsection 5.
Correct.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So this is just partnering with the last one that we covered. It's basically just removing the definition of slot change booth from the surveillance standards.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I don't have any questions on that. Any questions from public or board members about getting rid of the definition of slot change booth since it doesn't exist? Go ahead.
No comments. Thank you.
No questions or comments from me.
All right. Thank you, Chief Torgerson. That brings us now to possible removal of a section of NGC Regulation 5.180 subsection 2F regarding the operation of inter-casino linked systems. This came from technology recommendation.
Good afternoon, Jim Barbie, Chief of the Technology Division. The request to remove Reg 5.1802F removes the requirement that a licensee maintain specific equipment necessary for the board to monitor the operation of an inter-casino linked systems. These requirements are no longer needed as all the information necessary for monitoring and accounting are available within the back office reporting of an inter-casino linked system. The board will retain the ability to access this information via the general powers of the board granted under NRS 463-140. Therefore, the need to maintain this equipment no longer exists.
Thank you for the explanation. Are there questions or comments regarding possible removal of section 2F, subsection 2F of NGC Regulation 5.180? Any questions or comments from public here or in Carson City? Seeing none, questions or comments from board members?
No, thank you, Chairman. It's just another outdated reg. Thank you, Chief.
I'm in agreement and support the removal.
Bringing us to our last recommended removal of a section is NGC Regulation 6.118, subsection 4, mandatory disclosure provisions for credit applications and credit instruments. That came from the Audit Division.
Thank you, Chair. Thomasina Fremont, Chief of the Audit Division, for the record. So this again is a housekeeping item. In 2006, this regulation was adopted to add certain wording to the credit instruments and the credit applications. In a nutshell, it basically said that a credit instrument was the same as a check and would be treated the same. You could be prosecuted in the same way if you're nefarious. So there was this this paragraph that said that any credit instrument issued prior to the adoption date of this did not need to have that wording on it. So that was back in 2006. Don't think we have any credit instruments out there now that were issued in 2006, so this can go away.
Great. Thank you for the explanation. Are there questions or comments from public here or in Carson City regarding this particular regulation? Seeing none, questions or comments from board members?
Thank you, Chairman. So essentially, it just eliminates the unnecessary former requirements to set up a credit line. Now you can just set up a credit line and your check, if it bounces, you're prosecuted for bad checks.
So actually that was all dealt with back in 2006. What this is saying is if you have a, what that wording was saying is if you had something issued prior to 2006, it didn't have to have that wording. But there are no credit instruments out there issued prior to 2006 now. So it's just not necessary wording.
Great, thank you.
I'm in support of removal as this subsection no longer applies.
All right, that is all of the recommendations from board staff. Again, please allow me to thank all of the chiefs, all the other people who are here on behalf of their divisions, and all of the division personnel and agents who have worked on this over the past several months since receiving Governor Lombardo's executive order. Sincerely appreciate all your help, made our job very easy today and made both the improvements and the possible removals go very fast. Let me open it up now. Let me focus specifically back on improvements. Is there anyone here or in Carson City that has anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring to the board's attention for possible improvement to an NGC regulation? Mr. Reeser.
Good afternoon, Chair Hendrick, members of the board, Madam Secretary. I want to just flag 4 regulations that come across my desk with questions from members of the industry, or 3 regulations and a practice, I guess I would say, that I would suggest we look at.
And excuse me for interrupting you. These would be not for removal of something, but for improving the regulation. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah, please proceed.
The first one is, and these may require kind of a working group to be put together, and I'm happy to serve in whatever capacity that would assist that. But I think we need to revisit Regulation 9 with regard to temporary closures of locations, what happens when a licensee dies, how we deal with estate planning documents. Just last year, I had my assistant look back. I had 19 matters come across my desk. Might have just been a 15-minute conversation, but largely in the restricted area where people are not in the gaming business, they're in some other business. Estate planning issues, temporary closings, those types of things, sometimes to preserve grandfathers. These are big issues that people are struggling with, and the regulation is quite old. And I just I think we need to revisit it, and in particular in the estate planning area, sync it up to all the changes the legislature's made in probate and family trusts and whatnot. We're not synced up to that anymore. The second, and I know I might be getting someplace where I'm going to offend somebody in audit, but I think Reg 8130 could use a scrubbing to determine if we really need everything that is in that regulation. It just kind of morphed over the years and grown and grown and grown, and there's a lot in it that is more than just reporting loans to licensees. And all of the every time a public company amends its credit instrument that might have been approved at the time it got a pledge approval, it's got to file an 8130 amendment. I just think we might want to go back and see if there's some ways we could trim the number of 8130 filings that need to be made and sync it up to what audit really needs for the purposes of proper regulatory control. The third is 8020 on transfers among licensees. I now will date myself. In the good old days, the regulation operated the way it is written, which is you'd file an 8020, and if there wasn't an objection in 30 days, it was approved. But today we put virtually every 8020 through an application process, even when it may be changing a 2% interest among two members of an LLC for tax purposes or some other issue. And I think in this context, you certainly could have a provision that says if the board chair doesn't agree that it's de minimis, then it goes on to an agenda. But I think we ought to look at whether or not we're capturing lots of TOIs that don't need to be captured. And I'll just share some comments without attributing to licensees. If it's a matter of the board has a revenue requirement, I'm happy to pay a lot more than my $1,000 fee to get that if I don't have to wait 6 months for an application to go through the process. And so I would suggest we look at that. And finally, not to belabor your afternoon, but I know all three board members have already seen this in the first part of this year. A lot of public companies have to come back to you and ask you to amend registration orders because there's a statute that says amendments to registration orders have, anything that changes in the registration order has to be approved. But I don't think there's anything that would prevent the commission from adopting a regulation that says certain kinds of registration order changes, change in the name of a company, don't need to go through a full application. File the application, file the PTC1 and the PTC2, but we don't need to do an investigation and go on an agenda to change the name of an entity. I would argue you don't even need to do that for a conversion, which is statutory and has no other, other bells and whistles on it. But I do think that we ought to look at whether or not there's some delegation the commission could make on registration orders to streamline that process, especially where it is ministerial or clerical. Anyway, those are four that I have routine questions or issues come across the transom, and I would encourage us to look at those, and I'd be willing to help in that regard. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. Reeser. Very good examples of things that are much more big picture than some of what we're dealing with today. And I appreciate your volunteering to serve on a committee that will look at this before we have a formal regulatory workshop. You may have seen that Senate Bill 7, the draft actually had some language in there about chair approval for some of the estate planning issues that arise when a licensee, usually a licensee that's held a restricted license for years, if not decades, passes away or becomes incapacitated. It's a very difficult time for the family to have to deal with understanding that they didn't have a succession plan in place or the proper probate documents that matched up with gaming licensure. And so it's always difficult for the board and commission to deal with those matters. So definitely want to keep that on our list. So Reg 8, potential amendments, and Reg 8020 certainly brings up some fun memories for me. Chairman Bill Bible, when I was a very young Deputy Attorney General, he used to like to look over the Deputy Attorney Generals and say, well, Mr. Deputy, are you telling me that this reg says that we don't need to file an application? And he walked me down a primrose path that I want to thank former senior deputy, chief deputy Mike Wilson for keeping me out of harm's way by saying, no, even though that's exactly what it says in black and white wording, you know, Mr. Chairman, that that's not how the Gaming Control Board and Gaming Commission interpret that particular regulation. So I'm certainly on board of making that regulation fit in line with what the words say and the reality says. So I appreciate you bringing that one up, and we will certainly look at the small regulation. It changes, if we can do that to fit the statute for registration amendments, anything we can do in streamlining of that, as you say, the name or something, it seems silly that we have to wait for an application process and getting on a formal agenda on something that should be administratively held. So I welcome all of those changes, and we will certainly bring them up before and during our next formal regulation workshop.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from board members regarding Mr. Reeser's suggestions?
I'm not sure we can. It's not agendized.
Well, we're not voting on it. All we're doing is saying that the public has a right to bring forward suggestions in the reg workshop. Attorney General's office certainly keep me in line if I'm stepping out of my open meeting law lines here, but the public is supposed to be presenting suggestions to us today as well.
That is correct.
Yeah, I concur with everything Mr. Reeser suggested, and I look forward to implementing those changes.
I don't have anything additional to add.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Reeser. Anyone else from the public here in Carson City wishing to propose other improvement sections to Nevada Gaming Commission regulations that we didn't touch on today? All right, seeing none, let's go to, is there anyone else in the public wishing to speak either here or in Carson City about specific subsections of NGC regulations that you believe the board should consider for recommended removal to the governor pursuant to his executive order? Seeing none. Let me ask for a housekeeping matter. Madam Secretary, how is our court reporter doing? We've been at it for about an hour and a half. Do we need to take a 10-minute break, or should we keep moving forward?
I think we're all right, but a break is never a bad thing.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back on the record and look for motions regarding improving and removing NGC regulations that we would recommend to the Nevada Gaming Commission. We'll be in recess until, let's make it 12 minutes. Let's make it till 3:45. We'll be back. Thank you. All right, let's go back on the record. I believe we've heard all the comments from the public, members of the industry. Thank you all for your recommendations and your participation today. Also heard from board members and myself regarding each of these potential regulation revisions for improvement or removal. And so now I believe, unless anyone has further comments from the board, that we would be suitable for having discussion and a motion regarding, let's take first the regulations proposed for improvements to be made as recommendations to the Nevada Gaming Commission.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm in support of everything I've heard today. I have no opposition to any of the items under the improvement section.
I've had an opportunity to review the proposed amendments, and as noted on the record here today, I'm in support of each one of them.
All right, then I would entertain a motion if one of the board members wants to make that regarding a recommendation of the Nevada Gaming Commission regarding specific sections of regulations to be recommended to the governor for possible improvement.
I'll make that motion, Chair. I make a motion to recommend the following Nevada Gaming Commission regulations identified for improvement to the Nevada Gaming Commission for inclusion in the report for submission to the governor's office in accordance with Section 1 of Executive Order 2023-003. Regulation 5.110, Section 2, in-house progressive payoff schedules. Regulation 5.230, hosting center, registration required. Regulation 6.080, Section 6, audited financial statements. Regulation 6.090, Section 11, internal control for Group 1 licensees. Regulation 20.030, Section 7, rates and billings, user reports. Regulation 20.070, Section 1, reviewed financial statements. Regulation 23.040, Section 3, accounting for transactions between card table bank and card room bank. Regulation 26.060, commissions and taxes.
Very good, thank you. Is there discussion regarding the motion?
Not by me.
All right, then seeing none, Madam Secretary, will you please call for a vote on the motion?
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Watkins?
Aye.
Chairman Hendrick?
Aye. So that motion passes, and that will be the recommendation that we will be submitting to the Nevada Gaming Commission, and then they will be thereafter submitting their own recommendations to the governor pursuant to Executive Order 2023-03. Bringing us then to specific sections of Nevada Gaming Commission regulations that would be suitable for recommending removal of specific sections. I would entertain a motion if one of the members would like to make a motion for removal. And as discussed earlier, we need to recommend in descending order which specific regulations we believe are the most important down to the least important. Not that any of them are least important, but least important for our list. And with that, I believe we probably should have some discussion. Again, I want to thank all the division chiefs and their staff for coming up with their list of what they believe is ranked order, but I wanted to hear from board members if you also agree or disagree with some of those rankings. So I would open that up for comments from board members.
Thank you, Chairman. I would probably put the technology section at the top of the list in terms of order of descending importance. And then
which specific reg would that be?
Pretty much all of them. I think that's where we need to focus most of our attention on, and in the order that they're listed here, 5.215 on down. And then next for me of importance would be the enforcement division, and then probably move to the audit division. And I think that would be all of them.
All right, Member Watkins.
I don't necessarily take issue with those suggestions, but I do think that excuse me, the key employee reports creates significant efficiencies and it should be at the top of the list.
Thank you. I as well, again, want to thank the divisions and the chiefs for the recommendations. The one that stuck out to me was the $250,000 cap on Operation Aquino games. I was interested to hear, though, that it doesn't sound like the industry has been saying that they've been trying to offer 251,000, but that one certainly jumped out at me that it needs to be updated and correlated with all the other progressive machines. Also, jumped out at me the approval of promotional devices. That does sound burdensome on both non-restricted and restricted locations as well as board staff. So that one I thought was very important on removing just duplicative or burdensome regulation for no reason. A little bit the same comment about marking, registration, and distribution of gaming devices, and appreciated Mr. Dorsey's comments on that one as well as Mr. Reeser. I didn't have any specific changes. I like the order that the chiefs have all put together, but I do think what I just heard from Member Assad does make some sense. The governor has also asked us to focus a lot of attention on the technology division and whether or not we can speed things up for the industry. So I take that to heart, your comments. I would entertain a motion if either one of you wants to do it. At the same time, I would keep the order presented as we have on our agenda today and maybe move up Reg 5025 or Operation Aquino games, maybe move that up to the fourth spot and move Reg 6090 sub 2E internal control of Group 1 licensees down to the fifth spot. Otherwise, I'm fine. That's kind of where I'm at. But again, this exercise is not to change these regulations today, but to properly rank them so that we can make a recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission, and then they can make a recommendation to the governor. So either one of you wants to make a motion, I'm all ears.
I will go ahead and make a motion, Chair, but if I understand you correctly, did you suggest a particular place that Operation Aquino games be moved up to, or was it just that it be switched around with the internal control for Group 1 licensees?
This secondary, yeah, I was thinking it just moves up one and
Okay.
6090 moves down. So I've got them 1, 2, 3, 4. So Operation Aquino games would actually go into the fourth slot, and the current fourth slot 6090 sub 2E would move into the fifth spot. That was the only thing I was thinking.
Okay, and then Judge Assad, did you have a particular concern with keeping employee report at the top of the list and then
I agree. I think that should be number one.
okay, so then we'll go I'll make a motion based on each of our suggestions and hopefully I can get this right. We'll try to keep track. Okay. So I make a motion to recommend the following Nevada Gaming Commission regulations identified and ranked in descending order of priority for removal to the Nevada Gaming Commission for inclusion in the report for submission to the governor's office in accordance with Section 2 of Executive Order 2023-003. Regulation 3.100, employee report. And then Regulation 5.215, operation of a system supported or system-based gaming device. Regulation 14.105, installation of a system-based game or a system-supported game. Regulation 14.210, Section 2, approval of promotional devices, applications, and procedures. Regulation 14.170, Section 1B2, marking, registration, and distribution of gaming devices. Regulation 14.160, duplication of program storage media. Regulation 5.105, Section 8, duties of licensee. Regulation 5.200, Section 3A, licensing and operation of a gaming salon. Regulation 5.025, operation of Keno games. Regulation 6.0902E, internal control for Group 1 licensees. Regulation 5.225, Section 19, wagering accounts. Regulation 5, Section 12, Regulation 5, surveillance standards for non-restricted licensees, Section 12.9. Regulation 5, surveillance standards for non-restricted licensees, 1, Section 2. Regulation 5, surveillance standards for non-restricted licensees, 1.0105, 1.010, Section 5. Regulation 5.1802F, operation of an inter casino link system. And then regulation 6.118, section 4, mandatory disclosure provisions for credit applications and credit instruments, signature requirements.
Very good. Great job, Member Watkins. I was following along and I think you got the same order I've got. Let me see if I can read these back. So I have 1 is 3,100, 2 is 5,215, 3 is 14,105, 4 is 14,210, 5 is 14,170, 6 is 14,160, 7 is back up at 5.105 sub 8, 8 is 5,200, 9 is 5,025, 10 is 6,090, 11 is 5,22519, 12 is Reg 5 Surveillance Standards 12.9, 13 is Surveillance Standards 1.2, 14 is Reg 5 Surveillance Standards 1.010 sub 5, 15 is Reg 5 180 sub 2F, and 16 is Reg 6 118 sub 4.
That's what I have.
Great. Any questions or comments from board members about the motion?
Nope, perfect.
Good.
None for me,
All right,
sir.
Madam Secretary, please call for the roll on this motion.
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Watkins?
Aye.
Chairman Hendrick?
Aye. The motion passes, and that will be the recommendations that the board will be submitting to the Nevada Gaming Commission, which will be on their agenda later this month. Of course, they are certainly welcome to re-rank what we have put forward as potential removals 1 through 16, as well as the regulations for improvement. Again, I want to thank the staff, I'm sure for the third time. This meeting was very efficient, 2 hours long. That was only possible because the hours and hours that each divisions of the Gaming Control Board have put into reviewing these, as well as work with Mr. Torres, who put in lots of time and hours in putting this together, Deputy Brennig, who put in time, as well as the other attorney generals. So thank you for all of your help. Made us look good here today, I hope. With that brings us to our last matter on the agenda, which is the public comment section. Madam Secretary.
This item is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters. Anyone wishing to address the board may do so at this time. Comments by each person are limited to 3 minutes as a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. If board members ask questions of the speaker, the time needed to address those questions will not count against the speaker's 3-minute time period. If speakers have any handouts or written copies of verbal comments to provide for the record, please hand them to the enforcement agent seated to your left in Las Vegas or behind you in Carson City.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Pursuant to state open meeting law, matters brought to the attention of the board this time cannot be acted upon, but we're happy to hear comments from the public as well as comments from other board members at this time. Let's first go to Carson City. Anyone wishing to speak on public comment, please come to the podium now. Seeing no one, is there anyone here in Las Vegas wishing to speak during public comment? All right, that closes the public comments section. Again, thank you all for participating in the reg workshop today, as well as providing comments to staff, as well as providing industry comments over the years that have led us to these recommendations. As Mr. Reeser pointed out, we will continue to have discussion on this as the board looks forward to future reg workshops that will be actual formal recommendations to the commission on actually making any of these changes, as well as other suggestions. With that, thank you all for appearing, and we look forward to seeing the commission meeting in a couple weeks. Meeting is adjourned.